things that all fit together, I think, in how we analyze things in the end times. And it's one of these things that as we get closer, I think we should have a better understanding of how things work. Now, let me make, so I have these, of course, this is my view of how the horses of Revelation sort of interact with the seals, and we talk a little bit about that. So let me make a couple preliminary comments. The other night, I interviewed Dr. Francisco Gilwhite, Tom Hughes and I, and I think some people were sort of misunderstanding some of the things that I hope to accomplish by that. First of all, I think I've made very clear that Dr. Gilwhite, I do not believe is a Christian. He is a historian, evolutionary anthropologist, author, I think I said historian, and I think he has some very relevant knowledge and understanding of issues in the world. That doesn't mean he understands everything perfectly. My preliminary comment about the interview is this, though. When I do these interviews live, I do them live because it saves me a lot of time. I don't think everybody understands. I don't have an assistant. We're a very small church. I don't have a staff. And to set up one of these interviews and promote it and get everything coordinated and get the stream set up takes anywhere from 4 to 7 hours to do that. Now, this time I decided to stream to some other platforms. First time I'd ever tried that, and I think one of the platforms happened to be open on my computer, and so at the beginning, it's very embarrassing and it's very frustrating when this happens. I was getting this feedback loop in my headset of everything that I said and everything everybody else said about 15 or 20 seconds after it was said, because there's a delay between what you're live streaming and what's on the internet. So as a result, things kind of got a little bit off track at the beginning of the interview, and I apologize for that. I just didn't, I have a couple monitors, computers, iPad, and all this other stuff, and there was one thing open that was feeding into my headset that was causing a problem. So I don't agree with everything that Dr. Gilwhite said. I think anybody who is a fair-minded person should understand that. So, for example, Dr. Gilwhite believes in an old earth, and that came up during the course of the discussion. I don't believe in an old earth. I believe in a young earth. But then there are different gradations of what is a young earth to people. Then there are people, for example, Hugh Ross at Reasons to Believe is an old earth guy. And a lot of people in the young earth movement think he's a compromiser. But I think Hugh Ross is a Christian. I've seen him share the gospel with people. So what I found troubling in the interview, we have a live chat function. We don't really have moderators to do that. So I was moderating the comments. And I have to tell you that I was literally about this close to just pulling the plug on the whole thing because of the way the comments were going, that there were people in there heckling. And I will tell you that some of the people in there, and you know who you are, were engaged in heckling the Dr. Gilwhite, showed no respect, and engaged in some of the most unchristlike and ungodly behavior that I've seen. It was awful. And I'm just telling you, on our channel, we're associated with the church, and if we see something we don't like, we're going to mute you and block you. And I don't want to hear from anybody about, we're against free speech. You have free speech. You can go set up your own YouTube channel and say whatever you want pretty much whatever you want on the internet, as long as it doesn't offend Google. But I'm just telling you, as people, you need to. I'll give you an example. I'm a lawyer. I'm fairly opinionated. I think that might be clear from what I say. I was watching someone the other day. I don't know if I've ever met him or not. I strongly disagreed with his approach in what he was doing. And I was very, very tempted. I started typing a comment, and then I thought, this is not going to solve anything. It's not edifying. It's probably something I would say if I was standing with him face to face, privately, but I just don't know that it need to be made public. And I think you need to consider your comments. Everybody thinks they have the anonymity of the internet, right? God's watching, and you ought to think about that, because I'm telling you, what I saw in those comments it wasn't cussing and swearing, but it was not Christ-like behavior by any stretch of the imagination. And I want you to know that there are continuing discussions going on with Dr. Gil White on many issues, theological, salvific, and that type of thing. So I just want you to know that that's going on, but don't assume that all of that has to be made public. Do you understand what I'm saying? So get a grip, people. And if you don't like it, you can unsubscribe and unfollow us, but it's why we wrestle with comments and live chat and that type of thing, because the conduct sometimes is really pretty egregious. Pretend you're sitting here in the church, and would you say that out loud in the church? And if you wouldn't, then maybe you ought not to be posting it in chat or online. That's just in the context of this is a function of Fellowship Bible Chapel, what we do. I just think that people need to be careful. So we have all of these things. So having said that, I will make some references to the interview with Dr. Gil White, because some people want to know, well, how did it connect to Bible prophecy? And I'll explain that. I will just sort of preliminarily say, listen, he has some information, knowledge, and understanding on issues that I've rarely seen people in the church have. One of these is the history of anti-Semitism, and he admitted in the interview, I went all the way through college, I got my PhD, and I thought two-state solution was fine, Israel was wrong, Palestinians were great, and all that. He says, I was an anti-Semite. And then I educated myself. And he's done extensive digging in history. And we talked about this off air, I guess. He knows a lot about it. Now, some of his theological assumptions I would disagree with, but he does say that anti-Semitism is the central core issue he thinks today, and that what's happening is that issue is then bringing in the desire of people to control the world. And I think they are interconnected. And this is what a lot of Bible prophecy teachers have been saying for many years about the World Economic Forum and how they want to do control, and I'll talk a little bit about that today. Also about how, but he sort of brings the anti-Semitism part into this, which I think is fairly brilliant in the way that he's done this. So I interview Orthodox Jews on my channel and that type of thing. So sometimes people are going to say things you don't like or agree with, and that's fine, okay? But you can approach it in a much better manner than was approached the other night. And so we have this thing, and I have a friend who said this at a conference many years ago. It struck me as a very smart, intelligent, and profound comment. And he said that as this thing, that what Jesus talked about in Matthew chapter 24, And the birth pangs is this. We need to understand that this is a birthing process. Now, I've never given birth. I will never give birth. I will never identify as a person who gives birth. But I did have a kidney stone once. And even women have told me it's worse than giving birth. Now, I don't know. It's certainly different in size, but it's very painful. And as it gets closer to exiting, it gets very painful and intense. But then the birth takes place, and there's a great sense of relief. In my case, it was almost euphoric. Like, that's over, because it was like the end of a really good workout. And so the point my friend made was that this whole end times thing is that all of these things are happening, and the convergence and the acceleration and the growing intensity. It's a birthing process. Jesus never promised us a C-section. Now, I know I'm going to get emails now. Have you ever had a C-section? No, I've not had a C-section. I had an appendectomy once, but there's no baby there either. And it was by the way, I had a surgeon, and this is like 35 years ago. He had enormous hands. I mean, his fingers were twice as big as my fingers. And he did this the incision was, I don't even know how he got one finger in there, let alone took the thing out. But it worked, and I felt a lot better pretty quickly. But it is a birthing process, not a C-section. I think that's something to keep in mind. And the birth pangs, I think, do relate at least to the first 4 seals. And again, I get views of people all the time, and I appreciate that. But there's very little agreement, even among people, good, solid Christians who are studying this, that type of thing. I heard a video this week. I have to go back and see if I can find it. And it was, because there's a controversy about, are you a dispensationalist or are you a historic premillennialist? Yes. I sort of hold a lot of them. But then when you get into like the dispensational camp, which is where I grew up, by the way, there are different views of dispensationalism. And the guy I heard today, and everybody said, well, John Darby, he was the guy, and there's 7 dispensations. This does, and it ends, and then this one, and it ends. And this guy says, if Darby came back today and he found people saying that. Now, I haven't studied Darby specifically enough, so I'm just repeating what I'm pretty sure I remember I heard this guy say. And Darby would say that each dispensation kind of it has a hard end, and then you move on to the next one. This person said, I don't think Darby would recognize that as what he taught, which is kind of interesting. So we all, and I see people citing like church fathers and everything that support their position on some of them. And I had a friend who wrote a book called Dispensationalism Before Darby. Bill Watson. He's passed away a few years ago. He was a great guy. We did conferences together, went to lunch together, we talked, and we disagreed. And I told Dr. Watson, I said, I think you maybe are overreading some of these to support your position. And so maybe you should retitle your book things that kind of sound like dispensationalism before Darby came along. And we were friends. You understand that there's a way to go about this. And I love Bill. He was a great guy. And he had probably read more historic theological books and writings than anyone. He said, I've read everything that was ever written by the church fathers on eschatology. And I don't think he was overstating the case. Now, that doesn't mean he came to all the right conclusions. And right now, he's with the Lord, and probably doesn't make any difference to him anymore. And oh, that we would all be in that kind of condition. I have a friend, an acquaintance, who said he has a disease now. It's a kind of cancer. And he said the doctor has told him that it's not curable, but that they can treat it and put it into remission. To which my friend, who's kind of a smart aleck guy, says, "Oh, so something else can kill me." And I mean, I think that's a way of looking at it. And he understands that his times are in the Lord's hands, and the Lord will make that determination. So I hope I wasn't offensive to anybody, but I just think we need to sometimes remember to chill out. And it's very easy to really go after people on social media. You're effectively anonymous. That's why I use my real name. I don't make up a name because it's a way of giving myself accountability. Anyway, now where was I? So let's talk about some of the things that were going on this week. And let me move through here. And of course, where is my cursor? Oh, might help. Well, it's on. Oh, I put my mouse in the pocket, and it kind of switches over to another computer. So we're going to see this, and again, this is part of the thing with Dr. Gil White interview the other night, is we're promised that Jerusalem is going to become a cup of trembling. And we have passages that talk about this. Yeah, I think you can even pull Psalm 2 into this, Zechariah 12, Zechariah 13, Joel chapter 3, that talk about the centrality of Jerusalem and the Jewish people and Israel in the end times. I think it's unmistakable. And where I object to the preterist is, to me, preterism is a way to kind of, see, this is going to sound pejorative, but it's a way to avoid the obvious and try to be intellectual about it. And I just don't think it's a very valid point. But so the point of interviewing a guy like Dr. Gil White, he's very intelligent, by the way, and very probably funnier than he came off. He took over the interview. I mean, and we let him go because there's a way to do these and be respectful and clean up later. And by the way, Tom Hughes and I are thinking about doing a video to kind of clarify what we think were the important points. But the point that he made was, and the point that he sees is, that this issue of Jews in Israel is central to our times. When we talk about Jerusalem as a cup of reeling, a cup of drunkenness, a cup of trembling to the nations, we know that that's coming. I don't think we're there yet, but as I've said with all of these things, there's going to be a big buildup to that final thing where we will then say, this is that which was prophesied. And we're in that process right now, and starting on October 7th, as he said in the interview, and I agree with him, October 7th was the start of the next Holocaust. And by the way, I'm pretty sure he's not Jewish. He's from Mexico. So we're in this process. And part of the point is when a secular guy recognizes that, my problem is, why aren't the church people in the church recognizing it? Does that make sense? It makes sense to me. Or I wouldn't have said it, obviously. But, okay, I have many, many hours of stuff. By the way, next Sunday, I will be speaking at Renewed Life Church in a town in the Seattle area, which phonetically is Puyallup, Puyallup. And I asked like 4 different people this week, how do you say this? And a couple of them said, well, we're not sure, but you just say it real fast so nobody can criticize you for the way you said it. So Puyallup, something like that. So it's Puyallup, Puyallup, Washington, Renewed Life Church. I'll be speaking at 10:30 next Sunday. Then we're going to have a barbecue, and everybody's welcome to come. I think they're having a barbecue in Carrie-Ann, and then they meet in a Christian school there in that area. Then I'll do a prophecy update in the afternoon. So there won't be a prophecy update at the usual time next Sunday. I'm not sure that either one of those is going to be live streamed. They will certainly be recorded and put up later. I'll try to live stream it if possible, but I'm just not sure. The update, I'm just not sure about. So let's talk first about Israel. So I'm going to talk about Israel, the things going on, wars and rumors of wars, and control. People trying to control your thoughts, your mind, what you say, what you think. And they're doing it like, we're just trying to help you. But there is this very strong and increasingly strong desire to control what you think, what you can say, and that sort of thing. And we as Christians, so like, boy, aren't you inconsistent because you're saying, well, Christians should control what they say. But you should control what you say if you're a Christian, particularly if you're a Christian. So that's the tension. So we're going to talk about Israel in the north and Gaza, and it's going to be kind of a big jumbled mess because it's all interconnected. So here's an article from the Jerusalem Post. Israel must target civilian infrastructure in Lebanon to pressure Hezbollah, the head of the IDSF say. Now, this is the CEO of the IDSF, a retired lieutenant colonel named Yaron Buskila, who spoke on a radio, and he said this: the North is facing the issue of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, which seems like a kind of Russian roulette. How can the security system deal with this? To explain why occasionally there are no sirens, Hezbollah learned to operate with unmanned air UAVs at a low altitude close to the ground. Because of this, the UAV is not identified, and Hezbollah manages to operate them and attack before Israeli detection and identification system operates. So this is the problem. So Hezbollah has, what you see going on in the north is low-level warfare. Between Hamas and Hezbollah, since October 7th, there were some statistics that I saw this week. They fired $600 million worth of drones and missiles and rockets at Israel and mortars. That's a lot. But what they're doing, particularly Hezbollah in the north, which has many, many more, and I think I have an article close to the end here that says Hezbollah has come out and said, now, listen, you have to take that with a grain of salt because I don't always believe what they say, right? There's a lot of propaganda, but they've come out and said, we have the estimates I've seen from security people in Israel, and I've interviewed people from Alma Research and other people, Amir Avivi from the IDSF, 150 to 250,000. One of the Hezbollah commanders came out the other day and said, we have 1 million, over 1 million. So what you're seeing is low-level warfare. So I think Hezbollah has fired, I think it's 8,000 projectiles into Israel starting on October the 8th. And they didn't wait, by the way. Israel didn't go into Gaza right away. It was weeks before Israel went into Gaza with troops. Of course, they did do bombing runs and that sort of thing. But Hezbollah started attacking Israel right away. And I see these posts on Twitter and everywhere like, oh, look at Israel attacking Lebanon now. Well, wait a minute. Are you brain dead? So that might be an exception to the rule about being kind and responding. You're just trying to help the person out. But what they do in these attacks is they're constantly learning. They're smart people. One of the guys that was killed, and there's a website called almanar.lb, I think it is. That's a media website tied to Hezbollah. And there's a newspaper called Al-Akhbar, which is pretty much tied to Hezbollah as well in Lebanon. And Al-Manar, they have a section, there's like a Dome of the Rock picture over at the left side of the page. And if you click on that, you'll see they have a page for everyone that's been killed, every Hezbollah operative. And now they're up over 330 killed since October 7th. By the way, in Gaza, Israel's lost about 310 or between 310 and 315 military, which is amazing. I think people who analyze this before and sees what's happened in Gaza is pretty amazed that the number of deaths of IDF have been that low, just because of the nature of the fighting. So Hezbollah's lost 330, and if you go to one of these guys, a couple of these guys, one of them, it has like a resume, and he has a PhD in missile targeting. Do they have that at any of the state universities around here? Missile targeting? No, that's not throwing footballs. That's not missile targeting. And so this is the nature. And so they're constantly learning. And now they've learned, as this head of the CEO of the IDSF says, they've learned we shoot it low, they can't see it coming. And there have been a few get through. Now, there's some they just keep attacking over and over again because it's very good propaganda for them. And I don't know that Israel has anything left at that particular base, but they keep talking it. Here's what the IDSF head says. For every attack they launch at us, we retaliate proportionally. This is not how to deal with a terror organization, certainly not at this stage. Hezbollah understands that we are in negotiations over the hostages, and they want to pressure the state of Israel. We must not play into their hands. This is exactly the time to take action against Hezbollah and Lebanon as a country and attack civilian infrastructures. So there's disagreement within Israel about how to approach this. Do we just they launch 20 missiles at us, we launch 20 at them, or do we go in there and take out the whole civilian infrastructure? But when Israel does this, they're going to, I don't see how there's any other way that this happens. They're going to destroy Lebanon on the order of magnitude as the destruction in Gaza. The tunnels are worse. Got some information from Sarit Zahavi this week, and she said tunnels are worse in Lebanon than they are in Gaza. They're embedded, they're in bedrock, and they're going to be very difficult to destroy. You know, they're concrete and some reinforced concrete in Gaza, so you can blow them up. You got to blow up a mountain. So this is going to be very, very difficult for Israel. And they've said every other home in southern Lebanon is tied to Hezbollah in some way. That doesn't mean the people are tied to Hezbollah. It's just Hezbollah has taken those things over. And these tunnels, I'm told, go all the way to Beirut. So that's 40 miles. So what do? Do you go to the Litani River? And the problem is people have evacuated the north, 80,000 to 100,000. I get different numbers all the time. They don't live there. So imagine leaving your home in early October and you have not been back. let's say you had a restaurant or a business or a convenience store or a market that you ran or just an office job. All of that is gone. It's been gone since October. Now, there's an economic cost. Lebanon's the same way. 120,000 people have left southern Lebanon. So the economic toll of this war already is pretty enormous, and it's growing day by day. Even in the areas that are called the West Bank, those people don't have, they used to work in Israel. They don't work in Israel anymore. Although, and there's people that are concerned. I read an article this morning, and I don't remember where, in Efrat, which is inside the 1967 borders, which is a fiction. You know, everybody says, oh, if we just return to the 67 borders, there'll be peace. What they were before the Six-Day War in 1967. Oh, really? The borders in 1967 were the 1967 borders. And what happened? There was a war. So the 67 borders are not a solution. They're probably the problem. But in Efrat, which is within the area of biblical Judea called the West Bank, my understanding is people are being told that you have to now allow Palestinians to come back in and work in your neighborhood. And I have friends there that live there. They're like, are you kidding? Did you see what happened in Gaza? With all the people, there were 17,000, 18,000, 20,000 people a day coming across the Gaza border to work in Israel. And what were a lot of them doing? Gathering intel, where people live, or where's their safe room. I just don't know. I don't see how there's a solution. So anyway, so this is sort of the IDF. I would say this is where they're innovative. This is Marina Medvin. This is a person that I follow on Twitter. She's described as, by some people that don't like her, as a conservative firebrand. And she says, I like that. Thank you. And so it says here, ancient tactics being deployed by IDF soldiers on Israel's northern border with Lebanon. Now, I don't know why they did this. Some people think they were doing it as a joke, but actually I think they were trying to burn off brush over the border fence that you see there, the border wall, so that they could identify where Hezbollah people were fighting, because Hezbollah is sending patrols like right up to that wall. And then they launch a grenade or an RPG over. So they used an old catapult. Okay, I thought I had that set up to, let's play, that one's good enough to play again. So people said they innovated because that's what they had to do. Now, a couple things happened this week, and when you're in the fog of war, sometimes information gets out there that's not quite accurate. It's, hard enough to do it in our own daily lives, let alone with people shooting at you. So this guy, this is from the INSS, the Israeli Institute for National Security Studies, and they're centrist. They probably believe, I'm pretty sure most of the people associated with that, believe that a two-state solution is the answer. Haven't been able to shake them away from that ridiculous notion. But this guy this week, his name was Talib Sami Abdallah. He is commander of the central section along the border of Hezbollah. Pretty important guy. They took him out. And so the question that they ask in this article is, are we at a time of expanded, are things expanding? So here's an article by Seth Frantzman in Friday's Jerusalem, or I think it's in today's Jerusalem Post, Israel faces a two-front war. Hezbollah increases rocket attacks. It's a two-front war if you only look at Gaza and Lebanon. It's actually probably a seven-front war. And it's maybe even more than that. But he says here in this paragraph, lower right, prior to October 7th, Israel saw Hezbollah and Iran as the main enemy. Israel engaged in a 10-year campaign between the wars in Syria to try to reduce Iran's entrenchment in that country and to stop Hezbollah's increasingly sophisticated arsenal from expanding. Today, Israel faces Hezbollah's rocket fire deep inside its own borders. In essence, Iran is now fighting a campaign between the wars inside Israel, and Israel doesn't know if it should launch a major operation against Hezbollah. Meanwhile, the war boils over in Israel's north as Hezbollah escalates. And there has been an escalation. And Israel's been taking out leaders. Now, this guy had a funeral that they took, Abdallah, that they took out. And the guy speaking at the funeral the other day in Beirut, that's the dead guy's casket there on the right. This guy is number 2 in Hezbollah. And these guys rarely surface. They usually live underground like rats, and they come up occasionally. So he came up. Now, there were some reports that he himself was killed, the number 2 guy in Hezbollah, and I've not been able to confirm that. I don't think that it would be huge front page news, and maybe they're hiding it. Hezbollah is hiding it for propaganda purposes. I don't know. But in the funeral and the videos that were published with it, he said, the number 2 guy in Hezbollah, by the way, this number 2 guy in Hezbollah has a daughter. I'm sorry, he has a son. His son got married to an Iranian in 2020. It was the daughter of Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Al-Quds force for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard that had been taken out in January 2020 in a missile strike at Baghdad airport. So you see the connection. The number 2 guy in Hezbollah's son, his daughter-in-law is the daughter of Soleimani. And it's clear the connections are like that all over the place because Iran funds it. So what he said at this funeral was, and his name is Hasham Safi al-Din, let the enemy prepare himself to cry and wail. So in other words, we're going to take revenge on you. And so here you see the funeral in Beirut, very lavish funeral for this guy because he was very important in Hezbollah. And what do you see everywhere? You see the Dome of the Rock. It's the rallying cry. It has been the rallying cry for a long time. Dr. Gil White has written and talked extensively on the connection of the Palestinians and the way the Palestinians, particularly the founder, a guy named the Hajj Aman al-Husseini, who was appointed as the Mufti, the most important Muslim person in the Middle East outside of Mecca and maybe Cairo. I think he was a Palestinian. There's some belief that he was actually Egyptian, but he lived in Palestine. He worked extensively with the leader of Germany in World War II. In 1929, he provoked a very significant number that killed hundreds of Jews. And what he used to foment those attacks, the worst one was in Hebron, where I think about 80 were killed, massacred, including students at a yeshiva, at a seminary, and children. I mean, the New York Times covered it, was front page in the New York Times. And what did he say? They're going to destroy Al-Aqsa. And so he he used Al-Aqsa, which back in those days was the mosque that's on the Temple Mount, but now it sort of includes the whole compound. And so this is a common theme in Muslim provocation of their people, that the Jews want to destroy Al-Aqsa. And so when people are talking about the red heifer and building a third temple, they pick up on that and say, oh, look, this is why we have to protect Al-Aqsa. And that's why they're calling all of the stuff that's happening in Gaza Al-Aqsa flood. That it's the common theme. By the way, I think I've said this, I'll repeat it very briefly. It's all a big lie. It's all a big fat lie that this is the third holiest site in Islam. It's not. It never became the third holiest site in Islam until the Jews came back. Now, they will use the Muslim doctrine that once we occupy a place, it's ours forever. And we don't care if you come in and take it back from us. That's only temporary till we take it back in the final conflagration that we're going to cause and bring about. But the theory is that Muhammad came to Jerusalem on a horse and ascended to heaven. And it's a night journey. And it happened at the farthest mosque. Well, there was nothing in Jerusalem at that time. There was no mosque there. And it happened really close to Mecca. Mordecai Kedar, and even Saudi Arabian and other Islamic theological scholars have said, didn't happen. But you don't hear that anywhere else. It's just a complete propaganda lie to get people provoked. Because why? Because they're really coming after the Jews. And first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people. This is a very similar moment in world history. The G7 met this week. I'll talk about that in a minute. The big economic powers. Did any of them talk about this? Nobody talked about it. It's insane. So here's this is sort of a video tribute that they did to this guy who was killed this week, Abdallah. And they're very slick. I mean, they publish these videos. You can usually find them in Al Mayadeen or Al Manar websites. And you can see this guy. I mean, they have pictures of him in southern Lebanon, and he controlled that area. And he was very important. That's Nasrallah on the left, and I think that number 2 guy on the right. Here in the Washington Free Beacon, here's an article the other day. Hamas official says no one has an idea how many hostages are still alive. So everybody wants to negotiate about the hostages. Joe Biden says, oh, we got to negotiate the freedom of the hostages, but you talk to Hamas people, and they don't know. In fact, look at the interesting tidbit in this article at the Washington Free Beacon. A high-ranking Hamas official and negotiator for the terrorist group said no one has an idea about how many of the over 250 hostages taken from Israel on October 7th are still alive. I don't have any idea about that, the official said, told CNN during an interview in where? Beirut, Lebanon. Oh, wait a minute. He's a Hamas guy, and he's in Beirut. And so if you go to Alma Research, you will find that there are Hamas militias in Lebanon. They're Sunni, but they all work together to get the Jews. That's where Sunni and Shia are united. Here's another article from the Atlantic Council on the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. How Hamas is trying to shape the day after in Gaza. Everybody wants to talk about the day after. I personally think that that's the wrong focus. I mean, on October the 8th, people in our State Department were saying, okay, what's your plan for the day after? We haven't even invaded there yet. And you want us to talk about what's going to be the day after? I think you're sort of moving this thing along too quickly. And what do the Americans want? American State Department. Talk about the day after. What are you going to do in the day after? And so all this time, Hamas is watching. They're getting fed information, and they're trying to shape the day after. So when there were people talking about, okay, one of the things we will do in Gaza to help the peace, and this is a theory of Dr. Mordecai Kadar, and I think he might be right. It's a very tribal culture. And so the Palestinians don't get along because a lot of the Palestinians, Abbas is from a different tribe, and they're just never going to get along with him. What you need to do is you need to go to the tribes or clans. So that was suggested in Gaza. And what did Hamas start doing? Assassinating the heads of clans because they want to stay in power. So they're trying to shape everything on the ground. This is Jerusalem Post. Just a bunch of headlines. Hezbollah launches massive rocket barrage. Here, Gantz has left the war cabinet. It says Netanyahu has put political considerations before a hostage deal. And now what it appears like Gantz has sort of become the acting prime minister in the eyes of the Biden administration. Because he's coming to Washington this week. He's a leader of a party, but he's not the prime minister. He's not in the war cabinet. He's not the foreign minister or anything, but he's getting meetings with the government. And they have these issues with Netanyahu, we can't have Netanyahu come and speak to Congress. Here's some others, 8 soldiers killed in an explosion in Rafah. This is the Jerusalem Post from this morning. Everyone wants a ceasefire. Sinwar is trying to put things on Israel, pressure them to do things that he wants. It's all very, very complicated. This is a section from Al Akbar on Friday or Saturday's paper. And it says reasons for expanding the confrontation. So this is a Hezbollah newspaper supported by Hezbollah. We're going to increase everything in the north, expand the confrontation. So what Hezbollah is trying to do is I don't think they want all-out war, but they want to see how far they can push Israel before Israel responds with all-out war. Look, in that war, I think Israel will prevail, but I think there will be a lot of pain. What we seek to demonstrate and now cuts through our presentation of all the diplomatic and judicial efforts that were unable to stop the genocide is that this resistance has the right to expand the confrontation and launch a massive military attack on Tel Aviv, Haifa, Accra, and all of occupied Palestine with the aim of liberating it. And so this video popped up on some Hezbollah channels on Telegram and elsewhere. And this is a organization. Whoops, let me turn that down. This is a group of about 1,500 Hezbollah fighters that Hezbollah describes as suicide fighters. They released this video this week, and you'll notice the red headbands and the red flags, and that's an indication that they're serious and they're going to go to war. And so when I think I've heard Zarit Zahavi from Alma say this, if you want to know what Hezbollah's battle plan is, it's what Hamas did in Gaza. Just ramp it up a bunch. So they intended to come across the border, kidnap people, kill them, shoot people in army bases, and do all the things that Hamas did in southern Israel, they intended to do in northern Israel. Now, right now, with all those people, those villages and towns there along the border being evacuated, that might be more difficult. But this is 1,500, and they're self-described as suicide Hezbollah members. And so this is, everybody's talking about fears of escalation grow. I'll get to this in just, there's some reports now, I'm seeing reports that people in Gaza are upset with Hamas, that they're causing things to be trouble. The Yemenis are still tying up ships in the Red Sea. There was an article in Financial Times this week. It said, we don't expect shipping to recover in the Red Sea through the Suez Canal through the end of the year. This is having major impact on the world economy and that type of thing. So here, the Atlantic Council, Hezbollah escalates the war. This is Caroline Glick. And what did she note this morning? This is a video published on the Kremlin website. I think that's the Kremlin logo in the right-hand corner. It's either Kremlin or Russian Defense. The Russian Ministry of Defense has released a video showcasing a joint exercise between the navies of Russia and Egypt in the Mediterranean. And Caroline's comment to that was, because the Seventh Front War isn't enough. And understand, Russia's been doing a lot of things other than the war in Ukraine. They've effectively taken over a lot of northern and central Africa through the Wagner Group. Remember the guy who had a little plane problem that was head of the Wagner Group? They're still on the march. They're still active in Africa. And I'm not sure this is how I would describe it. They kind of act like the mafia. They come in and say, you can run the country. All you have to do is pay us protection money. And if you don't, we'll kill you. So that's the bargain that they strike everywhere. One of the soldiers killed in Gaza was this guy, an explosion today. I believe he was a teacher, and here he was when he was home on leave recently. And I think he's 49 years old, was serving in the reserve, and now he's gone. And this is typical of what's happening in Israel all the time. Babylon Bee kind of got into it this week and said, Palestinian researchers discover startling correlation between holding hostages in your home and people shooting at you. And you see they have a graph there, holding hostages and then getting shot, and you see how the longer you hold the hostages, the more likely your chance of getting shot. And there's a lot of videos out there, I'm not going to take the time to play them, about the hostage rescue operation. It was an amazing operation. They actually went in and actually lived in Gaza as Palestinian refugees for a couple of months, surveying the area. They said, we came up from up north. We moved down here to get away from the fighting up there. Or we were in Rafah, and we moved up here to the central part of Gaza to get away. And there are a couple million people in Gaza. It's not likely that everybody knows everybody. And they got away with it. And it's amazing. And the hostages are saying, listen, we were mistreated. One of the men has said, there are things that were done that I will never talk about, even to my family or anyone else. It's a pretty high level of cruelty. Now, of course, the people who are pro-Hamas say, well, yeah, but they baked a birthday cake for that guy. Oh, okay, that makes it all okay. And we have Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. Yeah, because they're suspected or actually convicted of having committed terrorist crimes. There's one guy they want to release. He murdered 10 people. They want to release him so he can become head of the Palestinian Authority. So, let's see. So, Gantz is out. This is So all Iranian-backed militias across the Middle East, they have ensured Hezbollah is prepared for any major war against Israel. This comes from OSINT Defender. OSINT, that means for open source intelligence. Sent Defender, I think it's a good guy to follow. And this is the one where he says, with the group said to now possess a stockpile over 1 million rockets and missiles, alongside thousands of one-way suicide drones. Now, I don't know if that's true. I think it's probably propaganda, but it does show you the scope and scale of what Israel is facing. I mentioned this, Israel's great strategic failure. They should have gone after Hezbollah in Lebanon a long time ago. They think they could manage the problem. They thought they could manage Hamas in Gaza, and that really didn't turn out to be very, very good thinking. You can read that at Tablet. In the show notes, I believe there's a link to this article. This is interesting. What is one thing you hear? Oh, they're causing a famine in Gaza, right? They're starving people. It's horrible what Israel's doing. So here is a report, Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, May 2024, Conclusions and Recommendations, Famine Review Committee, review of the Famine Early Warning Systems Network, IPC-compatible analysis for the northern governance of the Gaza Strip. And you can download the PDF and find it online, and there's a table in there. And the table says analysis period, FRC conclusion, Famine Review Committee conclusion. And look at this one over here. The FRC is unable to endorse the IPC Phase 5 famine classification for the projection period. They can't do it. So, now, there's a lot of things coming out in Israel. Believe me, I have hours and hours and hours, maybe a couple days worth of stuff that I'm not going to get to. Analog Hamas chiefs elude Israel's data-driven spies. So what's happening is Israel thought we've got technology, got people on the border, but what happened? They cut the force. People, from what I understand, there was 500 or fewer soldiers on the Gaza border because it was a holiday. They got attacked. The problem is the Hamas people are using analog communications that are hard to pick up digitally. But what I believe happened, and there's some indication of this, is that Hamas got the data from cell phones of people in southern Israel. There's places you can buy it. And they were able to tell when people were going to be there and not there. They could even tell what doors were locked or unlocked in people's homes because of the way people move through. And they used that. And then there's also indication that the whole warning system appears to have gotten hacked and went down 4 or 5 hours before the attack occurred. It came up just as they were already coming into Israel. That's why, and I think that's part of the problem. And this is kind of an interesting juxtaposition from the Turkish paper Daily Sabah. Israel's savage war on Gaza looms over the Hajj, the Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca. And my question is, did they ever say that during the Syrian civil war or any of the other Arab wars that have been fought or the Muslim wars that have been fought? No, it's just Israel. And remember, this is our Turkish identification. This comes from the newspaper Yeni Safek, which is a Erdogan mouthpiece newspaper in Istanbul, talking about this is like after Trump announces, I'm moving the embassy to Jerusalem. This is what the Turkish paper was publishing, which includes, hey, we need to come against that little red thing there. So when we go to prophecy conferences and everybody puts up an Ezekiel 38 map. Now, this one includes Saudi Arabia, which I don't think is really involved in the invasion in Ezekiel 38. But nevertheless, this is maybe one of the best Ezekiel 38 maps on the planet that came from them. That comes from somebody, Turkey, that's going to be involved in this. So here's a little clip from CBS News about what does the Biden administration think about this? This was the other day.
Israel conducted new strikes on central and southern Gaza. This follows Israeli officials saying Hamas launched several projectiles from northern Gaza into southern Israel overnight. And in the north, Hezbollah is ratcheting up its attacks, firing dozens more rockets across the border from Lebanon into northern Israel. CBS News has learned that U.S. officials are growing increasingly concerned that the Israeli military will start a war with the Iranian-backed militant group, that it will not be able to finish without U.S. support. And David, you also have new reporting on concerns from U.S. officials about what's happening north of Israel with Hezbollah in Lebanon. What can you tell us?
Well, this has been simmering really since the beginning of the war between Israel and Hamas. Hezbollah has been shelling positions in northern Israel, and Israel has been responding in a tit-for-tat fashion, sending shells back over the border into Lebanon at Hezbollah targets. But in the past couple weeks, this has really begun to escalate. Israel has started conducting deeper strikes, and just this week it killed a very senior Hezbollah commander, and Hezbollah is predictably responding to that by increasing the rocket barrages that are going into Israel. So this confrontation just continues to build, and
Israel conducted.
So, here's meetings. So some of these guys are going to be coming to Washington to meet with administration officials. And this is kind of an important map. This is from the Pentagon after the '67 war, and says, Israel, listen, you could not give up these areas. Whoops. Now, all those dark gray areas, I had made up a graphic that they're in red and obviously forgot to paste it into the slide. So look at it. You can't give up the West Bank. That's what the Pentagon said back in 1967. You got to keep the southern Sinai. You got to keep the Sinai around a lot. You got to keep part of the Negev. You got to keep Gaza. You got to keep the Golan. Now what does our government do? The Biden administration says, give it all up. Even though it's just the strategic high ground. And so as Dr. Gil White made a very good point, it's to weaken and destroy Israel. And the U.S. government's been involved in it for a long time. Oslo was just one, the Oslo Accords signed on the White House on September 13th, 1993 was just one example of that. There's a link to this in the notes, responding to Hezbollah's strategic offensive, Carolyn Glick's article in JNS, and then also another one by Melanie Phillips. Again, a link will be in the show notes, The Looming Choice for Diaspora Jews. And then you have this kind of interesting thing where the Imam Khomeini sent a letter to American university students. It's on his website. Because they're protesting Israel. They're hating on Israel. There was a protest in Lower Manhattan. They'd put up an exhibit of pictures of all the people killed or taken hostage at the Nova Music Festival. And what happened? They were protesting outside very strongly, to the point where they might have been committing crimes, saying, make October 7th happen again. That was in New York City and Lower Manhattan. And by the way, everybody thought when the university students went home, things might calm down a little bit. I don't think they've calmed down a little bit. And so Khomeini says, hey, you guys, you are on the right side of history. And he even puts up this video, he doesn't write with his right hand because it was injured in an assassination attempt. But do you see what the propaganda, and that's coming directly from the Ayatollah. And so somebody asked this question in an article, how do progressive college students, this was at Al Jamainer website, how do progressive college protesters justify support from Hamas and Iran? And the answer is they don't care. So a couple things, I'll probably go till 12:30 or so. Well, I started late, so it's okay if I go over, right? So this is, I'm not sure if this is a big deal or not. I'm not sure how big a deal it is. I think it's a big deal. So back in 1974, and here's the front page of the New York Times in June 9th of 1974, 50 years ago, Saudi Arabia and the U.S. signed a agreement. Now, the exact terms of the agreement, I think, are not well known. You can read the agreement. Some people say, well, it required the Saudis to buy and trade oil only in dollars. That's where we get the term petrodollars. That agreement expired a week ago today, on June 9th. So a lot of people are saying this is the end of the dollar's going to fall, the dollar's going to go away as the world reserve currency. I think that's going to happen, but I don't think that it's necessarily because of this. There's a whole lot of other reasons. We have too much debt, people losing confidence in us, and when you have the world's reserve currency, people expect you to behave a certain way. A lot of people in our government and the Federal Reserve have tried to take advantage of that. So it now says Saudi Arabia, this comes from BRICS News Twitter account, Saudi Arabia will now sell oil in multiple currencies, including the Chinese RMB, euros, yen, and yuan, instead of exclusively in US dollars. Putin also came out the other day and responded to that because of what else happened. But what's going on here is, this is why I'm not sure that the Saudis did this because they're going to change everything or because it's part of a way they're negotiating. They want a normalization agreement with the United States. They want an agreement with the United States where the United States is going to supply them with arms and security guarantees because they don't really like Iran. They don't trust Iran. So, by the way, you don't see a lot of Iranians coming to Mecca for the Hajj, for the pilgrimage. And probably in Iraq, there's a Sunni pilgrimage that's, I think, bigger than the Hajj, if I get the numbers correct. But anyway, so the U.S., this is from the Wall Street Journal just last Sunday, as this agreement is expiring, saying U.S. is going to offer a landmark defense treaty to Saudi Arabia in an effort to spur Israel normalization deal. So this is kind of an ongoing thing. And there's an editorial in Friday or today's Jerusalem Post talking about, and look, the Saudis are trying to expand their sphere of influence. This is a cover of Newsweek magazine earlier this week. And you see how the Saudis kind of view themselves as everything's orbiting around us, and we're very important. Everybody wants to be in league with us. This is part of the article, Arabian Might. There's some talk about Neom. They're not going to build as much at Neom as they were planning on, but then they come out and make announcements of a lot of other things that they're building down there now. So I think it's kind of up in the air. That's my opinion. Now, this week, the G7 met in Italy. Erdogan was there. They had people other than countries in the G7 come. Of course, that's Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy. And you can see everybody around the table. There's Biden, Erdogan, King Abdullah II of Jordan, Giorgia Meloni. Over on the right-hand side, Ursula von der Leyen from the European Union. I think Modi is there. And by the way, there's elections going all over. There are elections in the EU this week, snap elections in France. Modi barely hung on, even though he was supposed to win in a landslide. Everything politically, geopolitically, is in kind of a state of turmoil. There's Erdogan sitting next to Biden, the guy from Argentina to Biden's left. Not sure Joe's aware of that, but Babylon Bee had kind of a humorous thing. Did you see how he kind of bumped heads with the Pope? The Pope was in a wheelchair, and somebody said, Babylon Bee said, so if you don't like it, go complain to them. But I kind of thought it was humorous. Biden mistakes white clothed Pope for vanilla ice cream cone, giant vanilla ice cream cone. So there was a big dust up at this meeting. They always put out a statement at the end, and they negotiate it and they talk about it. A lot of it's decided before the meeting takes place, but there was one issue that was still open, and that was the issue: is the G7 going to say something about abortion rights? Now, Georgia Maloney, she's a unmarried mother. I think she broke up with her boyfriend, the father of her child, recently. But, she comes from a Catholic country, so she's going to respect Catholic views on abortion. And she got into it with Macron. Macron wanted, we recognize human rights and all this. This is very important for us. So they had a reception, and this is what happened at the reception. So Macron is coming through the receiving line, and he's coming up on Maloney. Now, remember, they've really gotten into it. And I would just say this: you have to love Italian women because you kind of know what they're thinking, right? So here's what happened at that. He comes, getting closer, getting closer. Uh-oh. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Did you see that look? I don't know. That's almost worth the of a rerun. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's too hard to know where she's coming from. And by the way, give her credit. There are things I like about her. She's kind of populist, right wing, they call her. She put the brakes on Italy's solar energy rollout. Now, one of the things that they did at the G7, though, but this goes back to the dollar as a reserve currency, they've now said, okay, there's all this money that we're holding that Russia has. We've sanctioned and we're holding it in banks around the world. And so the G7 comes in and says, yeah, we're going to take that. We're going to take that as collateral for a loan we're making to Ukraine for more weapons. Putin did not like that. And there's been effects from the war. This was a report from about a week ago. Gazprom unlikely to recover revenue hit by Putin's war. The Gazprom, that's the Russian energy giant, they came out and said, listen, gas exports are at a third of the pre-war level. We want to sell to China, but we need a pipeline, and that's still a big hurdle. We haven't got that resolved yet. There's issues with the Black Sea shipping. Ukraine is attacking facilities. And Gazprom says, we're probably not going to recover our revenue for a decade. That's a very interesting thing. So Putin has come out and said, listen, I don't like this. This was in The Guardian a week ago about how NATO is mapping out plans to block Russian invasion. And Putin came out and warned the U.S. of fatal consequences after cross-border missile strike. And so this is a few minutes. This is the Serbian president talking about what's going on. So by the way, Putin came out and said, I want to make peace with Ukraine. These are the terms. Ukraine's rejected them. So we're still in the wars and rumors of war. So the Serbian president came out and said this. This is very sort of chilling. So here's what he had to say. I'm not sure why that sound's not coming. Well, the trains left the station. Essentially what he says is, the world is on the verge of a major war. The way the other powers of the world are operating and acting relative to China and Russia is a big problem. He certainly will face a real disaster if you bet on the fact that someone is bluffing. It means that you have no better cards. But you just believe that the other side is weaker cards, and you're not sure about it because you don't know, and you didn't see his or their cards. Everybody is speaking only about war. Nobody wants to reach peace. Nobody speaks about peace. Peace is almost a forbidden word. And so, like along the lines of what I talked about with Dr. Gil White, do you see the convergence of this world at war? We want peace, and all these people running around saying we're gonna control everything and we're gonna make peace. What's happening in Europe, though, France said, okay, the EU kind of put a lot of right-wing populists into the European Parliament at levels never before seen. So France said, we need to get a handle on this, so they went to snap elections, and it didn't go very well for Macron. A lot of people gave Macron the look that Giorgia Meloni gave him when they went to the voting booth. And so you see this. So Marie Le Pen, here's Le Monde and Le Figaro, talking about, and this essentially says that the left unites against the extreme right. And it's always interesting. It's always the left or the center left, but it's never conservatives. It's always far right, because it's an invective that they throw out there. And so some people like it. The Times of London looked at this, but the Financial Times is like the relentless rise of the far right. It's always the far right. The Times, I think, is more accurate. Le Pen has moved away from some of the fringe elements on the right, and she may control the parliament. I mean, Macron, this is, you remember the Economist cover where Macron was walking on water? And remember John Haller, a Photoshop version of that, where he was in a Napoleon suit and he was sinking beneath the waves? I should have trotted that out today. Because I like that one. It took me a long time, but I thought it was pretty good. Well, Macron may be sinking, and there were a lot of talk when he came in with that pyramid and all-seeing eye thing that was above his head at his inauguration, that, this guy could be, that guy that we're looking for in Scripture. Now, it doesn't say anywhere in the Scripture that, the Antichrist will be married to his mother or anything like that, but that's beside it. So the point is that there's this push to control. This is Ursula von der Leyen speaking at the Copenhagen Democracy Summit, May 14th, 2024. Listen to what she says about, I think you'll get the point of this. It'll start here in just a second. I was supposed to have an intro to cover all this, and I forget what I was going to say.
Debunking is much more successful than debunking. Pre-bunking is basically the opposite of debunking. In short, prevention is preferable to cure. Perhaps if you think of information manipulation as a virus, instead of treating an infection once it has taken hold, that is debunking. It is much better to vaccinate so that the body is inoculated. Pre-bunking is the same approach. Because disinformation relies on people passing it on to others. It is essential that people know what malign information's influence is and what the techniques are that are behind it. And as the knowledge goes...
Okay, so what do you take away from this? So she's a globalist, World Economic Forum. She was paying attention during Charlie Vector. And so she's using that as an analogy that we have to give the state approved a treatment that we gave for Charlie Vector against the virus of misinformation. And we can't do debunking after the infection has taken hold in the information sphere, the information body, the collective body of people. We have to pre-bunk it. What does that mean? We have to do censorship of things we don't like. We can't have an open discussion of everything. So along the lines of what I discussed with Gil White, this is what the elites want to do is they want to control you. They want to do this through AI and technology. They want to do this through many other things, economic, disinformation, restriction on your freedom of movement. I could play for you a quote, rather famous clip from a World Economic Forum where the guy says, we got a problem, because, we elites will be able to travel around under net zero. But the other people, they're just going to have to use their virtual reality headsets to go someplace. And that's going to create more space. And that's what Yuval Harari spoke about. Remember the famous quotes from him back in 2017 or 18 at the World Economic Forum? What are we going to do with all these people when they have no value to add to us? In the Middle Ages, and that's his expertise, Middle Age history, medieval history. He said in the Middle Ages, the serfs at least provided a service to the lord of the manor. They cleaned up the, in the barn. But now we're entering an age where they may not have any value to add to society. And what are we going to do with them? The kind people say, we'll keep them in their homes and we'll give them virtual reality headsets and drugs. That's the kind part. So we're entering this very dark era in human history. And this pre-bunking has been around for a while. Here is a guy named Camus. He shares a Secretary General. This was back in November or December last year. And she was talking about the same thing. We need to pre-bunk. So go out and search on the internet for pre-bunking censorship, and you're going to get a lot of information. Remember, back in 2021, the Aspen Institute, this was commissioned, headed up by Katie Couric, talking about Commission on Information Disorder. Do you see? So this has been building for a time. So in 2021, when we were going through the Charlie Vector crisis, they were talking about the information disorder. And now here comes Ursula von der Leyen saying, we can give you a treatment against disinformation virus. I'm afraid to say those words for fear of getting... And everybody's pushing this. Financial Times. I like the Financial Times. New fronts in the disinformation wars. And you know what they say in this article? Boy, people on the right are saying that the media is engaged in disinformation. Can you believe that? People say we're disinformation propagators. And so they're the disinformation propagators because they're accusing us of spreading disinformation. And so it's a war. What do you do in a war? Part of this is technology and AI. I'm just going to play a couple minutes of this. This is Geoffrey Hinton. You can get it at Elon Musk's Twitter account talking about AI. This is about 15 minutes long, but I'm only going to play about 2 minutes.
In the spring of 2023, last year, I began to realize that these digital intelligences we're building might just be a lot better form of intelligence than us. And we had to take seriously the idea they were going to get smarter than us, and maybe within the next 20 years or so. And so we needed now to think seriously about...
So I'm going to short circuit that. You can find that at Elon Musk's Twitter account. He reposted it. I forget who put it up. But there's an article that came out this week, within the last week, a big publication, about 165 pages, called Situational Awareness. There is a link to that in the show notes. I'm giving you a lot of homework, by the way. And it's a situational awareness, the decade ahead, and it's from an AI insider. Now, I think the big takeaway from AI is not that it's all that great in many respects, but what it is, it's about the use of technology in everything and the increase in the power of that technology. And we're already seeing in many areas. And Hinton says, listen, well, look at what this guy says. AGI, artificial generative intelligence, that's their goal by 2027 is strikingly plausible. Hinton, by the way, said, I used to think it was 50, 60, 70 years in the future. I didn't have to worry about it. Now they're talking about it in 2 years, 3 years. And even Jeffrey Hinton, who was one of the big founders and starters of it, says, if there are any breakthroughs technology-wise, and the thing right now is if you just build the technology and server farms bigger, you get bigger results. But there may be technological breakthroughs, and we're seeing that happen a lot. So AGI 2027 is strikingly plausible. GPT-2 to GPT-4 took us from preschooler to smart high schooler abilities in 4 years, tracing trend lines, algorithmic efficiencies, and unhobbling gains from chatbot to agent. We should expect another preschooler to high schooler size qualitative jump by 2027. And these are the trend lines that they've observed as to what these models are able to accomplish. And they even have a thing where they talk about scores on bar exams and that type of thing. GPT-3, 40%, 40th percentile on people who took the bar exam. Now, 97, 99 percentile. That's just in a couple of years. And it's only going to increase. And the technological thing is going on very quickly, developing very, very quickly. So let me just play a clip of a couple of MSNBC things about Supreme Court decisions and the effect of them. I mean, this is very controversial in the United States. So here's Michelle Goldberg, who's a complete lunatic and a law professor from Michigan or someplace, talking about Supreme Court decisions. So the Supreme Court decision this week said bump stocks you can't make those illegal. The administrative agency, Bureau of ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, can't regulate them because they're not authorized by statute. And that's kind of a big deal. So the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. It's not authorized. There's a big decision coming probably this week or next about the Chevron decision that might apply that to all federal agencies. If it's not in your legislation, you can't do it. And the people at MSNBC are losing their minds. And it's kind of fun to watch. So here's Michelle Goldberg from the New York Times talking about that, and you'll see.
Basically. Right. And so this is, I mean, I think that this is, an augur of a more shocking remaking of basically the kind of federal government.
Yeah, I mean, and I think Michelle is talking about the Chevron cases and JARCSI. I'm not a Supreme Court reporter, but there are two big cases that Michelle's referring to here, Leah, that would basically undermine the power of federal agencies to do their work, which is, I mean, first of all, the fact that Clarence Thomas is weighing in on the machinery of a bump stock clip in relation to machine gun clips. This is not what Supreme Court justices traditionally do. That is the work of the ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. The court doesn't want ATF regulating bump stocks, and so basically took their power away to do so today. And they have even bigger fish to fry in these forthcoming cases. I mean, do you think we're going to see a wholesale revisitation of one of the central planks of sort of judicial deference to federal agencies?
I think we are going to see a massive realignment and reallocation of decision-making authority within the federal government. Under the current system, the Chevron doctrine, as you were explaining, allows administrative agencies to adopt regulations that fill in gaps that are left by statutes that Congress enacts. If the court does away with the Chevron doctrine, it will be assuming that power for itself. That is, the people who just use 6 pictures and an animated GIF that were supplied by a gun advocacy group in order to justify unleashing bump stocks on the American people, those are the people that are going to be deciding the future of health, safety, medical, food, drug, environmental regulation if they actually do overrule Chevron. And there's also the Jharkhasi case, as you noted, that could also limit the power of agencies. There's also a case about an additional climate regulation, Ohio versus EPA. I mean, this June is just a storm, a catastrophic storm waiting to happen.
So listen, she says they're going to make all these decisions in June. Obergefell, which overturned thousands of years of human history on the structure of marriage, came out in June, and I'll bet she was praising it. Oh, this is a wonderful decision. Boy, how's that worked out? That's been 9 years ago, by the way. Boy, that really changed, didn't it? And so she's upset Chevron, which says federal agencies, well, if the legislation isn't that good, the federal agencies can enact law and make laws and regulations. And I remember I started law school, the Code of Federal Regulations was like this. Now it takes up shelves and shelves and shelves and shelves and shelves and shelves because Congress just says, well, you know, the federal agency can implement this. And the Supreme Court, to their credit, may come out this, I'm hoping it happens this way. And there was some indication in the decision on the bump stocks that they're saying, listen, if Congress wants to allow the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to regulate those, put it in the law. Very easy. And she's like, oh my goodness, you know what they're seeing? They're seeing the effective, maybe the end of a lot of the deep state. And bravo, right? Yes. High fives. And that's why they're attacking Alito and Thomas mercilessly in the press. So here's just a little clip of Morning Joe, and they're talking about Roe. They have a lady on who's written a book called The Fall of Roe. And I want you to listen to a little bit of this and understand why they didn't like Roe falling. Because it says a lot about where they are morally and spiritually. And I think this is important, and I will finish with this.
2 years after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, a new book is shedding light on conservatives' years-long strategy that finally led to the Dobbs decision. The book is titled The Fall of Roe, The Rise of a New America. It explores how the right's most fervent anti-abortion activists end up persuading the court to end nearly 50 years of precedent. Joining us now, the book's co-authors, national religion correspondent for the New York Times, Elizabeth Dias, and national political correspondent for the New York Times, Lisa Lerner. Good morning to you both. Congratulations. Today's pub day.
Today is pub day.
Congratulations.
Pub day. Thank you.
Your baby is out into the world.
It
Here we go.
What a sick joke to
Typically
make.
reported like
You gave birth to
350
your book
interviews. You really get into the history of this issue.
That should have been
it's a
aborted.
lot to get through, but I guess I'll start at the end, which is how the dam ultimately broke after this half-century effort to overturn Roe versus Wade. Donald Trump getting in the White House obviously put those 3 justices on the Supreme Court. But at the end, what happened that pushed it over the finish line?
So our book is really the first narrative of how Roe fell. And what we did was look at the final decade of what we call the Roe era. And what we saw in this period is this tightly connected web of conservative anti-abortion activists were able to move the levers of power in their favor in ways big and really small, working at state houses to start pushing through legislation. And then, as you point out, Donald Trump gets elected. They get really, they jump on that train. It becomes a bullet train for them. And they get really lucky. They get those 3 seats on the Supreme Court. And they're dealing with an abortion rights movement that's really ill-equipped and unprepared to take on this threat. And a country that really has this pervasive sense of denial that this right that's been part of American life for 2 generations could suddenly disappear.
So, Elizabeth, Donald Trump, obviously, evangelicals were skeptical of him in 2015, even in 2016. He had talked about being pro-choice many times in public previous to that. And then maybe ultimately they realized they can perhaps shape him a little bit because he so desperately wants to be elected that they can dictate what they want from him.
Mm-hmm. They did. And one of the really interesting things we found, too, is it wasn't just evangelicals, right? That actually Catholics played a really important role in the anti-abortion movement's growth, origins. Evangelicals were actually late coming to that in history. And the leaders of the anti-abortion movement actually really were rooted in their conservative Christian values about family, womanhood, and of course abortion. And what our story shows is that it was those values that really were behind the movement. I mean, certainly, as Lisa was saying, there's all these levers of power that they pulled. But at its core, this is all happening over a period when America is becoming increasingly secular. There's so much cultural change, especially when it comes to marriage, family, and sex. And these are the things that the anti-abortion movement ultimately is hoping to change, right? It's not just about overturning Roe. It's about a much bigger half-century plan to really roll back the sexual revolution.
Joe, you've watched this, so
Okay, that's the money quote. It was a rollback of the sexual revolution. So the religion editor of the New York Slimes says, and she gets it correct, this is why they are wetting their pants over this. I don't know how else to describe it. Because it is a battle about morality, public morality, and what public law is allowed to do. And everybody says, you can't legislate morality, which is the most ridiculous statement I have ever heard in my life. Every law, virtually every law, is a statement of a moral judgment. The left, they enact their morality. Might be no morality, or the morality might be you can't criticize our actions on any level. This is a very, very big deal, and we need to talk about it more. So this is, watch the Supreme Court over the next 2 weeks, actually the next 10 days, because you might see some very significant decisions. I'm praying and hoping that they come out. And they're correct, that law professor, I wish I'd been in her class. You see, in law school, you're allowed to argue with the professor, which is really kind of fun at times. It's just like, it's how you learn. I mean, it's the Socratic method. But they're right. This is a legal, moral, political earthquake that could happen. When you think of the scripture that says earthquakes in diverse places, I'm not sure they had this one in mind, but it could have been in mind, because there's sort of a spiritual application to those things that's going on. So listen, this is a very significant time. So back to Dr. Gil White. So what he's doing from a secular historian standpoint is tying up a lot of those ends that relate to Bible prophecy, whether he knows or not. In fact, he would say, Bible prophecy, why would you even care about Bible prophecy? This is the stuff this stuff's been going on all along. Well, that statement in itself is prophetic. Everything is as it's always been. But there's a big change and intervention coming. So appreciate you listening. Pay attention, a lot going on. Let's pray and we'll get you out of here. Lord, pray for the talk next week in Seattle and in Washington. Pray that you'll bring those that need to hear what's said. And just pray that you'll bless us this week, give us opportunities to share the gospel, because there are a lot of opportunities to open conversations with people now. And just pray, Lord, that you'll guide us by your Holy Spirit and give us the wisdom to direct those conversations in the right way. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.